In our lives, what we treasure the most, we naturally protect the most. In fact, you could say that what's most important to us, we build discipline around. We shield ourselves from, or we treasure what's most important to us. Let's take an example, for instance. If someone truly treasures their marriage, as of course every marriage should, then that person is going to build discipline around that marriage because it's something they treasure. Not because they have to, not because they just should, but because you care so much about the treasure of covenant marriage, then the discipline is a natural result. I'm not going to look at certain things. I'm not going to be around certain people. I'm not going to do certain behavior. And I am going to fight for this, and I am going to spend time in this, and I am going to invest. So we create discipline around what we most treasure. What I want to present to you today is that discipline in our intimate walk with Jesus is directly related to how much we treasure our walk with Jesus. The paradigm shifts are this, is that sometimes we have seen discipline as restrictive or religious. We've thought that someone who is highly disciplined in their relationship with Jesus, maybe they're just a little bit religious or a little bit rigid, or maybe that's too restrictive. The second paradigm related to disciplines in our walk with Jesus is that it's a personality type. Some people are going to be more wired for discipline and others are not, and if you're not wired that way, you'll just never be that way. But of course, we would never correlate that to something we treasure like marriage and go, well, some are going to put discipline around their marriage and some are not going to. That's not based on your personality. That's based on how much you treasure your marriage. In the same way, how much we treasure our walk with Jesus is how much we will build what I would say like high riverbanks around our lives. Think of it this way. If you desire 20, 30, 40 years down the road to be more in love with Jesus than you are today, then you would do things to naturally put you 40 years down the road with a heart that's on fire for God. It's like a river. And when a flood comes and that river begins to rise, if it spills over its riverbanks, then that river is going to be a mile wide and an inch deep. It's going to be muddy. It's going to be murky. It's going to have all kinds of debris and junk in it. But if that river has high, strong riverbanks, then when the floodwaters come and it begins to rise, but it can't go over the riverbanks, then it's actually just going to build a deeper river. It's going to dig down, and that river will not become wider, it will actually become deeper. In the same way in our Christian lives, when we will add discipline to our love for Jesus, then when circumstances come, when obstacles come, when adversity comes, instead of our lives becoming kind of a mess and going a mile wide and an inch deep and being a little murky and full of debris, then we actually go deeper in Jesus because our disciplines allow us to go there. David says in Psalm chapter 16, he says, "The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I will have a delightful inheritance." This is the paradigm shift on spiritual disciplines in the Christian life, is that these boundary lines, they're not restrictive and they're not religious. They've fallen for us in pleasant places. And if we will allow those boundary lines to keep us in the river, to keep us in the heart of God, to keep us with tender hearts, to keep us in the Word and prayer, then our inheritance will be delightful. Years down the road, 30, 40, 50 years, we'll look back and go, my heart is more on fire than it was the day I met Jesus. We need to change the paradigm that the most passionate among us are the ones who just met Jesus. When we see someone who's kind of wildly in love with God and maybe they're expressing it and people say to themselves and go, they just met Jesus. Or, I remember when I was like that when I first met Jesus. This is a wrong paradigm. Since when do you love someone less the longer you walk with them? Since when are you less excited about someone the deeper you go in understanding them? Shouldn't we be more in love the longer this relationship goes? Shouldn't our 20th wedding anniversary have a richness and a depth and an excitement to it that is far greater than our first wedding anniversary? In the same way, we need to shift the paradigm in the body of Christ, that we would be most on fire the day before we meet Him face to face. Our most zealous years would be the years that progress in knowing Him more and more. The only way we will walk this out is by walking with spiritual disciplines in our lives that keep the rivers of our lives going deeper and deeper in God through every season of life. These boundary lines, they've fallen for us in pleasant places. They're not restrictive, they're not religious. We need to recover some things that we've called religious. They're actually treasuring what God has given us in an intimate walk with Him. The second paradigm related to a personality type is that where we would say certain people are wired to be disciplined. But again, if discipline is related to love and related to zeal and related to extravagance, then every personality type can apply discipline, maybe in unique ways, but it's still discipline. I want to shatter that paradigm and say maybe you're more artistic or maybe you're more spontaneous. But just as you would still treasure your marriage, even as a spontaneous person, in the same way, I want to invite you to bring discipline into your life in treasuring your personal walk with Jesus. That even a spontaneous personality or an artistic personality needs those riverbanks just as much as the next person, so that 40 years down the road, you're more in love with Jesus. What are the obstacles that often exist in our lives that keep us from doing this? I think most of us would know exactly what they are. They're often busyness, they're often distraction, or most often they're just not applying the intentionality that we need to for something that we massively treasure. But I would present to you today that if we truly treasure it, then we would go to any length to prioritize and discipline this area of our lives. What are some practicals? How do we walk this out in a practical way? How could you activate on this literally tomorrow? Everything about this course is about activation, not just inspiration, but activation. Number one, I would want to activate you that your prayer life can go to a whole nother level tomorrow. It's literally as simple as building that discipline into our lives. And it's really in prayer as simple as this: when are we going to do it, and what are we going to pray about, and where are we going to do it? I'd invite you to take those three things and make them super practical in your life. Where do you want to pray tomorrow? When do you want to pray tomorrow? And what do you want to pray about tomorrow? And the only reason we might often lack in our prayer lives is not out of not wanting to. Every believer, if you ask them, do you want a vibrant prayer life? They're going to say, I totally want a vibrant prayer life. So the things that hold us back are practical. Have you set a place? Have you set a time? And do you know what you're praying for when you set that place and time? I promise you, if you would add that riverbank to your life, you will find yourself with an ever-deepening prayer life as the years go on, year by year. So find that place, set that time, and pick those things. Secondly, practically, is our life in the Word. We would be fools in some ways to think that we could be zealous for God without a daily diet of the Word. We would be fools to think that we could be in our 60s, 70s, and 80s and more on fire for God than we are today without making the Word a daily nutrient that we are adding to our lives. So similar to prayer, it's practical. When are we reading the Word? And secondly, where are we reading in the Word? I don't know about you, but for many years I sort of played Bible roulette. I don't know what to read or where to read, so I'd kind of flip it open and be like, well, I guess I'll just read here today. Inevitably, it always landed in like middle of Isaiah, and it never made any sense, and it didn't really make me want to read the next day. But if we have a plan, a simple plan, this is when I'm reading the Word, and this is how I'm reading the Word, this is where I'm going to read it, then getting out of bed and really not hitting the snooze button too many times becomes that much easier because we have vision for our interior life with God. And so where are you reading in the Word? And I want to encourage you, pick a book. Pick a plan, an annual reading plan. Grab a hold of the Read Scripture app, which is just remarkable and has the Bible Project videos so that we understand even a little bit more of what we're reading. Pick a chronological Bible and read through the Bible chronologically. Read 10 chapters a day of the New Testament and you will have read through the New Testament every single month. Or pick one book and saturate it and immerse yourself in it for maybe months at a time. But have a plan of where you're reading in the Word. The third practical I'll leave you with is a lifestyle of fasting. It's a riverbank that sometimes a little hard to add to our lives. It's not maybe quite as fun at first glance as prayer and the Word are, but I want to encourage you because Jesus speaks to us about when we fast, not if we would fast. And He teaches us about how to fast, when we would fast, because He assumes that fasting would be a natural discipline added to our lives. And I want to say this, is that fasting is really spiritual feasting. It's not It's not as burdensome and heavy as we have made it to be. It's simply this. It's setting aside something that is legitimately good, like food, for a given time because we're believing for an even greater spiritual reality. That if I'll set this aside, I'll be able to relate to a spiritual hunger that is greater than my physical hunger, and that the simplicity of that alone is going to lead me into a deeper walk with Jesus. So I encourage you, set boundaries for prayer in your life. Set boundaries for the Word in your life, and set boundaries for fasting in your life, and you will find that year by year you have an ever-increasing, growing fire in your heart for God, a zeal for Him that grows as we get older. And the last thing I'll say is this, on this paradigm, is the greatest vision of your life is your interior vision. Our exterior vision will change. It's already changed 3, 4, 5 times in your life up to this point. But our interior vision is far more stable and concrete than our exterior vision, where we are not in control of a lot of circumstances. But I want to give you inspiration and a spark today to have an interior vision, a discipline. Where are you going in the next 10 years? How close do you want to be? How kind of friendship do you want to have with God? How deep in the Word and deep in prayer and deep in fasting and a life of spiritual hunger do you desire in your life? That is directly related to our ability to build these riverbanks of discipline in our life so that we are in love with God in every season of our lives.